it's such a sacred privilege to hold that, to have women come in and share these devastating stories, and yet when they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered because they've found a safe space that won't judge them.
Welcome to the Is Education Podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. Hosted by me, Pasifika Haufano, and my brother,
that's me, Kalolo Haufano.
The Is Education Podcast features lively discussions.
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Matai Samoa.
As well as tips on leadership and business by some of the top minds and influencers around the world.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Is Education Podcast. Welcome to our Is Education Podcast, where it's all about helping people unleash their greatness. I'm your host, Pasifika Haufano, and joining us on our show today as our guest is Maureen Fepuleai. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thanks for the invite. Yeah.
You are very welcome. Just to start things off with an icebreaker question, just so that people can kind of get to know you a little bit. My question for you is, what is the best advice that anyone has ever shared with you?
I pondered over that because I'm 50-something now, and I'm thinking all the advice I've gotten in my lifetime. One that jumped out at me, I suppose, was prevention is better than cure. And so that's something my parents always tried to teach me. Take care of it now before it becomes something greater or more, difficult to handle or resolve later. I haven't always done it, but I think, it's always a learning process. Yeah. So yes, prevention is better than cure.
Prevention is better than cure. Some great advice. And I think along with that is just the power to anticipate, right? To anticipate the good or the bad consequences of the choices that you're making in the present moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay, well, Maureen, would love to learn a little bit more about you and your story. Right?
Cool,
So it's kind of an open-ended question. You can approach it however you want. What makes Maureen Maureen? What is your story?
So I'm going to go backwards. So currently I am a mum of 5 and a grandmother of 5. I was born in Samoa and educated and raised mainly in Wellington. When my parents came over, I was 18 months old and they wanted a better future for their children. So I'm the oldest of 4, 3 girls and a boy. And then I come back to the present. I grew up very far Samoa. And very far Samoa for my family then is what people would say today is abuse. But when I was doing my master's, I had time to reflect on the way my parents raised us. And I think the way they raised us was how they knew best for that time. We're talking about the 70s. The dawn raids were happening at that time. A lot of racism down in Wellington for my parents and their brothers and sisters who had brought us all over to have a better life. So I resolved to not be like, or not raise my children like mum and dad did. But as I found one day, I turned into my mother basically, and I knew that is something that I knew better to do. So I had to really change the way I would parent. And I think, because we all grew up, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we grew up in the Samoan ward. And growing up in the Samoan ward meant you grew up in a Samoan village, basically. And so the rules of the village were the rules that we had in our Samoan ward. And I knew that as much love, as much support as there was for me growing up in the Samoan ward or in the church at that time, there was something missing. And I didn't want my children to have to realize that as well. So I had to change the way I parent. And I went through a lot of violence and abuse in my first marriage. And I knew I did not want my children growing up having that as the normal for them. So I left And I really had to change a lot of what I'd known growing up. It wasn't easy. A lot of kickback. No, who are you? We don't know you anymore. Your kids are going to be street kids because there's no discipline. They're going to this and that fail and so forth. But I still discipline, but this time with love. But I know the discipline my parents dealt us with was love in their own context, their own experience. So what makes me who I am today, I think, is pure love. Knowing who I am, knowing who my children are, where we've come from, the potential we have to go forward and serve our communities in a better way. There's just so much, but I have to credit my parents for their hard work ethic. If anything else, their work ethic. All my aunties and uncles sacrificed, worked 2-3 jobs just to survive. And that's enabled me to get a good education, enabling my children to have opportunities for education. So I think if there was one word, if you were to ask me, what's one word that is, central to who I am today, I'd say gratitude. Yeah, through any challenges, whatever I may have been put through or I brought on myself as well as an adult, just gratitude that I'm here where I am today and hopefully able to be a good example for those coming through, our younger generations coming through, my children, my grandchildren. And stop me because I tend to go on.
It's awesome. So looking back at your journey, how your parents raised you and kind of the challenges you went through, especially during your marriage, has kind of shaped you and helped you become this person that you are today. Yeah. And I guess it's a very, sensitive topic as well when it comes to culture.
Absolutely.
I guess a question around that is, especially with, I'm starting to see it now in these days where people are starting to bring their culture out more, right? Diversity in the workplace, more inclusion, Māori and Pasifika and all that. And there's also the other side as well. You got that side where people are very proud and all that. And there's the other side, which you kind of just talked about, right? And along with the culture is kind of like the old school mindset, the discipline and all that kind of thing that you talked about where, back then it was right, today it's wrong, right? But just talking about culture in general, from your perspective and just embracing culture wherever you are, whether you're Samoa, Tonga, Fijian, I guess what are some things that, what is some advice that you can give around navigating through that? Like, bringing your culture and being proud of that as well.
Oh, thank you. Good question. When I was doing my master's, it's titled Whiangainga, which in Samoan is a sacred covenant between the brother and the sister. And it all boils down to protection, to love, to respect, how to treat each other. And then you go on to treat your family the same way. I believe my parents and those of my parents' generation were taught to punish their children with this discipline. In my exegesis, I talk about the missionaries coming to Samoa. And I think their intention was a very good Christian wanting to save the savages who didn't know any better. And with that, they brought the Bible to Samoa. And in the Bible, if you love your child or you love your family, you want them to be saved and go to heaven. And so how do you save them? By making sure they do the right thing. And how do you make sure they do the right thing? My parents used to quote, what was the quote? Spare the rod, spoil the child. And yet nowhere in the Bible are those words, spare the rod, spoil the child.
What does that mean?
It means if you don't smack your child into submission, into obedience, they're going to sin. And if they sin, where do they go? Yeah. They're going to hell. So if you love your child, you're going to smack them to make sure they obey the commandments. Therefore, be saved in heaven. And I believe that's the mentality my parents and my grandparents were colonized with. And because of that, that's where I believe what people now call abuse. That's how I believe we were raised, because they wanted to save us. They wanted us to be together as a family in heaven. We can't do that if we're not listening. And then over probably 4 or 5 generations, I believe, up to my generation, that is how our people were taught. So now I've forgotten your question. What is the advice for culture?
Correct, yeah.
Is to go back and understand. I think for my generation, for my children's generation, they think, how could mum and dad be so mean? How could they beat us? How could they pressure us? How could they always put us down? I needed to go back. Those were the questions I asked. But in my study, I needed to go back. Why? What happened? There's a proverb in Samoan. O whanau tangata, no. O whanau manu, e whawhange whungala au. O whanau tangata, whawhange upu. Meaning, the offspring of birds are fed with the nectar of the trees. The offspring of humans are nurtured with words. So if that alanga upu proverb existed way back then, that tells me we were taught with words, with stories, with counsel from here, not by beating. So I believe when the missionaries came with their intent to save us all into heaven, that's where I believe a lot of what my generation and my children's generation, others, had to go through. So to understand, to come back to your culture, because many of our young people are resenting or rejecting their culture, think, oh no, I remember the way my aunties were, my grandparents were, blah. I don't want any part of that. We need to go back and understand the context of their lives at that time. And then we have choices today, as adults especially, to do better and to forgive the past because they didn't know any better. We know better today. There's no excuse, I think, for my children's generation going forward to not know better and apply that better learning. And then you embrace your culture. Culture is also not concrete, I believe. I believe you can, it's fluid, it progresses, it evolves. And for anyone to say, no, that's the way we do it in Samoa. Well, no, that's not the way my mum and dad said they do it in their generation. So each generation has the ability to stand up, to leafoi, celebrate, but also to evolve and make better the things that maybe were hurting previous generations. Make it better today. Why not? Yeah, I hope that answers.
Oh, 100%. I've learned a lot just from what you said there. Because what I was looking for was, like, how do you bring your culture? How do you embrace that? And what you said is going back and understanding what is your culture first. What makes up your culture, right? And not just judging your culture based on how your parents lived or how your grandparents lived or whatever, but understanding the intentions behind it. Because there's one thing is the intention, then the other side is the interpretation of something, right? Yeah. And when we talk about intention, you brought up Christianity. That's a huge part of a Pacific culture, right? But it's actually breaking it down into values. What is the Pacific values? You talked about family, reciprocity, respect, love, family, Those values
are I'm Samoan. I can't speak for Tonga, for Fiji or Kaiki or any, but I think that's why Christianity was so easily accepted. We were already living, all of these values that, Christianity came and said, hey, love thy neighbor as thyself. Turn the other cheek. We were already doing that.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's in the context of that generation. Yeah. And this generation, we need to understand.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where I come back to, like, intention and versus interpretation as well. The values like family, respect, I mean, they're universal values. They're principles, right? Levae, they did some research and they found 8 common Pacific values, whether you're Fijian, Tongan, Samoan. They found that there were 8 common values that we all had in common, right? Which I just mentioned. But what I'm saying is like, I had this conversation earlier last week. We were teaching some people at a factory, and they're Pacific learners, and they had the question. It was a leadership program. It was like, how do you bring your culture to work? It's very hard, and it's a good question. Mm-hmm. But this is what we basically concluded from that conversation was there's a time and place, and there's cultural values, then you've got cultural practices, and traditions, right? There's a time and place for practices and for protocols, but the values, you can apply that in many different ways. You think of a tree, the trunk, typically stays the same. It is what it is, right? Then you got branches that come from it, right? The trunk of the tree is like your value. That's your core value. That's the thickness of it, right? But you can apply it, like the different branches, apply it in many different ways, like respect. You can still live that value, but how you apply that in the workplace could be a little bit different to how you apply it at home, et cetera, right? Just because it doesn't fit the same way here like it does in this context, it doesn't mean that it's not your value or that you have to leave it at the door type of thing.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's which lens you choose to apply it through.
Yeah.
So if we look at a fala, a mat, right, you're weaving in that respect, weaving in that reciprocity, weaving in the any value. You're weaving it into the fala of your workplace. Then there's a fala of home, fala of church, but it's still respect, still reciprocity. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I sit here and I look at you, and I've known you for a while, and I know your family as well. And, you're just this huge influence, positive influence in the community that you're around. I see it on social media, even in person. You're part of a group that you founded and that you facilitate called Telenor Iq, right? And, I could tell that you're in it to serve. You bring your heart, you bring your soul and everything into it. You want the best for people. And I could tell just based on your story and your journey that has helped shape who you are today. You become this advocate for positive change and positive culture and all that, right? So I'd love to learn a little bit more about Telenor Iq.
Oh, for sure.
All right. So for those who don't know what it is, what is Telenor Iq and how did it all start?
Oh, yeah, whafte mole fesili. So I returned to school at the age of just turning 40. And it was a very scary experience, but I was one of those ulavalu ones, back in high school. Yeah, I'm going to school, I'm doing my assignments, I'm passing and blah, blah, blah. And then I got married very young, had children. School was like something that I had this dream. I was going to marry someone who would work and I would stay home, raise the children, white picket fence and everything. And that marriage was quite violent. So I escaped it and I was left with nothing. And I was the first member in my family to go on the solo mum's benefit. And it was such an embarrassment for my parents. Like I said, they came to New Zealand and worked from day one. And a benefit was something that was not part of our family plan. And so when I got into I had to apply for a solo mother's benefit, I felt the shame of it because I was not raised to have to rely on the government of all places. And I looked at my 5 children and I thought, I was a good student in school, but because of choices I made, I didn't pursue that. So I decided I didn't want my children to ever be on a benefit or to ever know the suffering that I was going through, not being able to make ends meet, not being able to feed them, give them shoes even, things like that. So I decided to go back to school.
And you were 40 at the time?
I just turning 40.
Just turning 40.
And I felt like I was going to be the oldest bag there, thinking I'm going to go to school with all these, school leavers. And it scared me because I thought, what if I go and I fail? And I'm doing this for my children. Anyway, I entered MIT and loved it. I felt so supported there. I had amazing tutors, Misha, Sue, Judy, Tom, to name a few. And I realized It was the best choice I could have made. It was hard though. And I felt a lot of support was targeted towards a younger generation. So when I completed my degree, there were quite a few of us in that age, 40s, 50s. I thought, what is there for us older, more mature women going back to study? I couldn't find anything. So I decided to form a group, and we called it IQ Talanoa, Indigenous Queen Talanoa. IQ came about because I'd been invited to Panmure Steak, where I did a workshop on identity and believing in yourself as a female. And I put IQ on the board. And there was a big protest from one of the ladies who attended. How dare you try to put IQ on the board? You're telling us we're dumb. That's a Palangi concept. Doesn't belong here. You know, that's wrong. I said, well, what does IQ stand for you? I've just written the letters. She said, well, everyone knows it's, how you measure how intelligent you are. I said, absolutely. Through one lens. How about another lens? She said, no, everyone knows IQ means intelligent quotient. So I said, well, I know that you're a really fit person and you do yoga. What's your IQ in yoga? Oh, really high. Well, if you give me a score, what would you give yourself? 1,000. Absolutely. My IQ is in making koko leisa. I'm the queen of making koko. And so when we looked at IQ from a different lens or through a different lens, they realized it's what you make it. Like you talked about interpretation earlier.
Yeah.
It's how you perceive it. What lens are you looking at it? So we decided IQ was going to become something not intimidating, something we own. So what does IQ stand for? And the woman came up with all these names. So I left, went away, and I pondered, and I thought, that's the name of my group. Indigenous Queen Talanoa. Because Indigenous is not Pacific. Indigenous is every single woman out there, from wherever your heritage leads you, whether it's back to Britain, back to Scotland, Holland, Fiji, wherever it is, you are Indigenous to somewhere. And that's how we got the name Indigenous IQ. And I wanted to make it a group that would support women or Indigenous queens who wanted to return to study, but had spent how many years away from the classroom, because it can be very scary, intimidating, especially when I wanted to go back. How are you going to feed your kids? You're too old for that. Just wait for the grandkids to come in, take care of your grandkids. My gosh, you're going to fail. How dare you think you can go back to school? You're dumb. You're stupid. These are the comments that I got. Wow. And these are the comments I know many women are getting. So I wanted a space that they would feel safe to come and ask their questions. Where can I get funding? Do you think I can get in? What is it like? Because we don't come as women. We come as mums, aunties, chauffeurs, Uber drivers, Uber Eats. We come with so many hats. And so even that alone is enough to say, it's too scary. I can't do it. I'm too dumb. I've always been told how dumb I am, especially if you've been in an abusive relationship. Oh, you're so stupid, you'll fail. And of course, when women come with that mindset, it's true to them. But then when they enter IQ Talanoa, we do our best to say, look at you, who created you? And I believe in God. So when probably 99% of our members are people who believe in God. And when we bring God into the Talanoa, there's a scripture in Psalms 139 or 129, where it says, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I always remind our women, who created you? Do you think he would create something that, aligned with what these liars are saying? And these liars may have been from 20, 30 years ago, but they still live here. So in IQ Talanoa, we try to create a space that changes the narrative that's up here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it doesn't go away completely, but now they're getting strength. Our women are getting strength to realize, I can do it.
Yeah.
Whether I start at level 1, level 2, step by step, I can do it. And so we've had women who started with us back in 2018, now doing their masters. I'm on my post-graduate trying to finish my PhD. We've had women graduate from their certificates, from their diplomas, and not because of IQ, but they are members of IQ. And I hope that they've gathered enough strength to do that, but also to influence others around them. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, it always makes
Sorry,
sense.
I just go on and on sometimes.
I'm sitting here listening. I'm enjoying it, right? I'm like, as you're talking, it's almost like I'm watching a movie. So I'm just like watching you grow. You've gone through this tough journey, which you've kind of interpreted as like something that's helped shape who you are today. And you've become this person of service and love and just wanting to help lift others.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And, that's a lot of trauma there. That I don't know the details of what happened, but I can imagine it. Going back to school, you're 40 now, and you've got all these things going through your head, and you're carrying all this baggage as well, this trauma and all of that self-doubt that's kind of been shaped and conditioned over the years. I mean, if you're living with someone 24/7 and that's all you hear, you're useless. You can't do.
Yeah.
It's like. You know what I mean? Your environment does do something to you.
And it becomes your normal.
Exactly. Right. And you're talking about, you've created this, you've created a group, but it's also a community. It's a safe space for people to come in. And what I really loved, what you said, when you just wrote IQ on the whiteboard, and already there was like drama around what the interpretation of it. Yeah. But what I love what you did there around just bringing people together, having a talanoa about, what does it mean to you? Yeah. And bringing in that, it's about you. It's not about, what I want for you. It's about what you want for you. I'm here to support that, And how long has it been now since you've created IQ?
So we created, July 2018. And our first meeting was August 2018. And it's just become more than what I figured. One thing I think I forgot to mention was I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. And many of our women who have come into this space have shared very similar stories. And so it may not be a bad marriage. In adulthood, it might have started
upbringing
from when they were children. And when that is brought out into this space, it's such a sacred privilege to hold that, to have women come in and share these devastating stories. And yet, when they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered because they've found a safe space that won't judge them, a safe space where their stories can be heard.
Yeah.
And then they can pick up from there and try to change the narrative for themselves and for future generations.
Yeah. I feel, so that's pretty deep. That's pretty deep when you're dealing with a group or there's some people within the community who have this trauma, right? How do you, as Maureen, how do you support the women who have kind of experienced that kind of stuff to go from, where they are to doing more, being better and growing from there?
It's holding that safe space for them. Some are ready to move on. Some are not ready to move on. It's saying, wherever you are, it's okay. IQ Talanoa is here. Whatever pace you want to go, you may disappear and come back later. It doesn't matter. IQ Talanoa is here for you. During COVID, when we went into lockdown, we used to have in-people meetings, When lockdown happened, it turned into Zoom. And then we created a book of poetry. And I invited people to write. Say, we're not able to meet in person anymore. You can write. write things out as a therapy, write things out as a holding space. Because now we're stuck home with our beautiful families 24/7. And sometimes for intergenerational homes, that wasn't always a safe space for our Indigenous queens. Right. So we got funding. We got the book published. We had amazing poetry come out. These are the kinds of activities we try to create. But for me, myself, it's just holding a safe space for each woman. I get a lot of requests, private messaging. I need to talk. Let's talk. I'm just going through, a hard time. Let's talk. We've had women who have needed help, food, clothing. So we put it out on our Facebook page. Oh my gosh, our community just get together and food parcels, donated clothing, even driving to the person's home to see, is there anything else you need? Yeah, it's just holding a safe and a genuine sacred space for each person. My God, they're all at different stages. And so we can't say, oh, come on. It's been a few months now. You just snap out of it. That's not safe.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You've created a nice community. I mean, you're face-to-face, you've created a book and your Facebook group as well, which is awesome. As education, we believe in communities. If you want to sustain long-lasting positive impact, like to sustain it long-term, you have to do it through communities. It's not enough to just do courses.
Yeah.
Right? It's that whole pastoral care. And when we're talking about community, our interpretation of it as education is the 5 C's, right? So every community needs a cause, a common cause that we all believe in, want to focus or dedicate everything to, The other C is collaboration, so like working together. The other C is connection. So it's important to have that relationship sense of unity. The other C is contribution. Everyone has a need to serve or to use their talents and gifts to give, right? Not just to receive.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other C is my favorite, is celebration. Got to celebrate. If you want to see an example of a good community, Mate Maatonga, you just done recently.
Oh yeah.
But that's what I love. That's what you've done. You've created a safe space and it's helped you, but it's also helped others along the way as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the education side of things as well. So you going back to school, 39, 40, and it was very tough for you. I guess, and you said there was not much support for the more mature students. I felt
there wasn't. There was always events, always fun things to do for the school leavers.
Right.
And I thought, we don't do that. We're mature women. We are mothers. Some of us were grandmothers. So we couldn't just go out and hang out with we had assignments to do. We're there to study. And I felt every time I asked somewhere, and not on campus, out there in the big wide world, what is there to support mature Pasifika women who have come back to the classroom? I couldn't find anything. So I thought, well, let's get something started. And, I mean, we don't have all the answers, but we do our best. And I think what you talked about pastoral care, I never knew what pastoral care was. We just did it. Then we were told later, oh, you're doing pastoral. Oh, yeah. I just thought it was tautua, which is service, or alofa, which is love, And I thought, oh, that's good that we are known for a community that provides pastoral care. In education right now, I'm back at MIT, and I work there as what's my role? Practicum Placement Coordinator. And we're working with, all these amazing students. One thing I always say, especially, and not just to our mature students, to every single student, is that you've come to the MIT space not as an empty vessel. You've come with a lifetime, a wealth of experience, a lifetime and a wealth of knowledge that none of us here. You're here to learn a certain thing, but don't ever dismiss what you've come with.
Exactly.
Be proud, hold that high, speak it, because nobody else has walked in your shoes to get to MIT. So don't ever allow anyone to make you feel you're not academic enough or your English is broken. So what? You're here to learn the theories and that, but what you're bringing with you will only enhance them, because ultimately they want to graduate and serve their own communities.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate, I suppose, of celebrate what you have brought to this institution. Don't ever put yourself down. These voices from 10, 15, 20 years ago, from yesterday even. Yeah, lock it away and know that you're building new narratives. And look for the people who are going to inspire you. Hang out with the people who are going to help you, support you, empower you. Look for those people. The ones who are not, yeah, you can love them, but you can lock them away for a little bit. While you come into the space, empower yourself so you can empower your children, whoever is looking up to you.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a scary thing. Even just, I reflect on my experience going to uni or even just an intermediate high school and that, right? When you come into a new space, it can kind of feel scary. Don't know anyone. And there is sometimes a lot of comparing, especially when you're getting graded. Oh, what's your grade? Oh, there's a little bit of that as well, right? But I like what your approach is like, don't compare yourself to others. Just focus on you and becoming the better version of yourself and think about what you have to bring as well. You're not coming empty-handed, right? Like, that's why as education, our slogan is unleash your greatness.
Absolutely.
Our job is not to give it to you.
Yeah.
Our job is to help you discover what's already there, to unleash it.
Absolutely.
Right? And in whatever we teach you is just to build upon what you already have, who you already are. That's all it is.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And it's something that we both believe in, which is awesome. I guess just like because we're both in the education space, right? And I'm working with adults in that as well. And even with adults, they go through their own challenges. They doubt, self-confidence and all that. I guess speaking to education training providers, I guess what would you say in terms of advising around best support for students, especially for our Indigenous queens?
Oh, okay. How long do you have?
How long do we have?
Okay. First of all, I suppose to me it starts in the home. I want to say to our Pasifika, our Indigenous parents, caregivers, stop the F word. No more F word. Fail is such a powerful, just a 4-letter word. And yet it just sticks here. Fail, Stop. Don't allow that word to be part of any, reverse psychology type thing, Oh, you're just going to fail. And for that person saying it, it's their way to maybe encourage or maybe make them so angry that they go, oh, I'll show you, I'm going to succeed. Mental health today, the resilience of our young people today is not what it used to be. So I think for training providers, for parents, for ainga, for whoever the support system is, our words need to be chosen very carefully. Even lecturers, anyone in the teaching space should never say the word fail, ever. Because once it's planted, once you hear it, it just becomes such an easy flag that just, I only got 65 fail. Oh, I didn't get as good a mark as Basi fail. And yet they've passed,
Yeah.
So I think we need to provide. It comes back to the relationship between the student, especially if you're Pasifika. We work collectively, yeah? So the student, the training provider or the institute or the learning, organisation, and student and the ainga, they need to work together as a triangle. They really need to back each other up. The student is being told at school, you're an individual. you know, you will, you, I. But the ainga here saying, actually, we are together. So the student here, the Pasifika one especially, is torn, yeah? The Institute needs to get on board and realize whichever cultural background the student and the ainga come from needs to be respected. And then together they, you know, boy, you've got this amazing institution here, amazing support from the ainga here. And then the student, they all want the same. They need to collaborate. One of your C's, Collaborate and connect in order to be able to, at the end, celebrate what this young person. And they're going to change. They might go back to the ainga and go, oh, I don't know if I like these new kind of ideas you're bringing. But that's part of the evolving culture, huh? And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I just have so many things going on in my head. Connection, collaboration, respect for culture. But then it works for the ainga too. Respect the space that the student needs to study. Stop piling fe'aus or chores on them. They've got an exam, you know, make sure that they are supported in their study. And I'm talking from my own experience when I was younger. That's what I do for my children now. You have an exam, you go study. You're not paying bills, you're studying, you know. You just, whatever you need, make sure you manage your time. I want you to succeed. Fail is not a word we use in our home. Yeah.
Love it. So fail, don't use that word. Reminds me of Te Wanga and Aotearoa when I used to teach for them. I used to teach their business programs, and the way that they graded their programs was achieved or yet to achieve.
Oh, I like that.
And you get 3 or 4 attempts to turn that yet to achieve into achieved. So learning is always on a learning curve rather than black and white pass or fail.
Wow.
And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that shift towards that, right? Yeah, so thank you for sharing this. I mean, I've learned so much from this Talanoa.
You're welcome.
Especially some good, you know, don't just rely on the provider to give you the support that you need. I like what you did. You took the initiative. You created IQ Talanoa. You know, you took things into your own hand and helped create a pathway for yourself instead of waiting for someone else to give it or make it for you. Right? Sure. Which is awesome. You're an inspiration. You're a beautiful human being. I love the work that you're doing. Keep up the awesome work. Keep inspiring people. And I guess just to end things off, what would be your last words of encouragement for our listeners?
Oh, wait. Now my mind's gone blank. Believe, and you will do it. Believe and you will do it. Whatever background you've come from, whatever you've done in your past, just believe and you will do it.
Believe and you will do it. Starts in the mind, starts in the heart. I love it. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on this podcast.
Thank you,
all the best.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.